I want to talk a little bit further about where you put your documentation when you're writing your paragraphs. Now, in a previous video, I went over MLA documentation, how to write the long form documentation, or you take the one from the database like this one is. And I also talked about how you would do the in-text citations for those sources. For instance, with one author, it would be Frank. If that document had page numbers on it, and I can see it was on page 67, then I can also add the page number. But if there's no page numbers present, we don't have to. That was all addressed in the MLA video. So you can watch that one if you need a refresher on how to make the long form documentation for your works cited or how to make in-text citations for any of your sources. But let's say I'm at the stage where I'm writing my paper and I'm writing my third paragraph for my humanities essay. And in that paragraph, I'm supposed to talk about the message or meaning. So in the thesis statement of my introduction, I let the reader know that they're going to learn about the visual vocabulary in paragraph 2, but the types of space and colors that are present in the artwork I chose. And then in the third paragraph, I'm going to talk about what the painting is about, what it means, what it represents, why it's important. And so when I start writing that third paragraph, I want to make sure that I begin with a topic sentence that gives the big idea or the message or what this paragraph is going to cover. So in my thesis, I would communicate that the painting is a statement about how an artist can achieve immortality by living forever through their art. And then just like it is in my thesis statement, when I start my third paragraph, I want to make sure the first sentence also has that same message, that it matches whatever I said was the topic or whatever the big idea was in my thesis statement. So the first sentence of the paragraph is going to then connect directly back to the introduction paragraph where my thesis statement is. And once I have established the topic, then I can go on to prove that this message is true, either through my own analysis and observations, but definitely along with an expert's opinion. I want to make sure I keep only one message as a central focus of my discussion. If you incorporate multiple messages, then your paragraph is going to feel really disjointed and it doesn't connect. So we just want to focus on one message, even if you found multiple messages. And obviously, if there's a research requirement, you need to choose something that's going to correspond with your research. So let's say I am utilizing this source by Frank, and I want to insert it into my writing. Obviously, I don't want to quote word for word from Frank. It is much better if I put it in my own words. The more quotes that appear in your writing is the less for your teacher to grade. And the less there is for the teacher to grade, the lower the grade is going to be. So we want to paraphrase things in our own words as much as possible. So let's say, for instance, I went through this source by Frank and I paraphrased or summarized this concept in the yellow in my own words. How do I show then that I summarized this and it was not my idea? Well, what I'm going to do is take my citation and put it right at the end of where I did my summary. Now, if you do a summary, sometimes you do more than one sentence in order to summarize or paraphrase what you read. It could be, for instance, that when I summarized the stuff by Frank, I actually did it for 2 sentences in my writing and not one, and that's okay. All we have to do is move this documentation, and we'll put it at the end where we stopped using Frank. You don't cite after every sentence. You put it at the end of when you're done using it. So if, for instance, here, this sentence here that is not highlighted, if that was my opinion, the writer, the student, if I wrote this from my own thoughts, there's going to be no citation there. But then if I go back to using Frank again, a second time, I have to cite it over again when I'm finished using it. So I can show you that I use Frank up here, not here, but then I use it again here. Sometimes it can be confusing though, because it needs to be clear to the reader where your research begins and ends. So how do you know, for instance, that this one down here for Frank is not just for this one sentence, for the whole thing? You can do that oftentimes with a good transition that indicates to the reader that you've shifted and changed to something else, and then that's followed by a documentation at the end. Another way that you can document is actually to write the name of the author or the publication into your sentence. So if I put here, on the other hand, according to Frank, and then continue summarizing, the reader can see where I began using the source and then where I ended using the source. Technically, if you do it like this, where you give credit written into your paragraph, into your sentences, you don't actually have to do this at the end, because the important thing is you gave credit. And so as long as you've given credit, you haven't plagiarized. So sometimes it's better to go with these little citations here at the end, if that's clearer to the reader. At other times, it might be actually clearer to write it into your sentence just like that. And other times, when you have a huge section like this, that all comes from one source, and you feel like, well, I'm not sure the reader understands where I start and where I stop. If that's not clear, then we can document it twice just to make sure the reader understands that you started here and you ended here. And those are two different methods of doing in-text documentation. They both count, and that's only in the MLA style, because APA will be a little bit different.